Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into something I think we all deal with? That feeling of just not being quite good enough.
Yeah.
Like that inner critic who's always comparing us to others and whispering that we're falling short.
Oh, absolutely. It's so universal.
Totally. Well, in this deep dive, we're going to try to really understand this feeling, and get this. Our main source material is actually a podcast conversation.
Which makes perfect sense.
Right, because it's such a relatable thing, right? Like a real human thing to struggle with.
Totally. And what really struck me about the podcast we're looking at is how much it emphasizes that, like, this is universal.
Yeah.
Even the hosts, who might think, oh, they're podcast hosts, they must have it all together. Even they admit to struggling with feeling not good enough sometimes.
It's so refreshing to hear that, though, isn't it?
Oh, totally.
Like, they don't shy away from it at all.
Not at all.
In fact, at one point, one of the hosts is talking about comparing himself to people he sees on social media. And he actually says, what am I even doing with my life?
Ah, yes. Classic. And it's a perfect illustration of how social media can really amplify those feelings, right? We're constantly bombarded with those carefully curated highlight reels.
It's true.
And it makes it so hard to not compare ourselves, even though we know we shouldn't.
It makes you wonder, though, is this a new thing? Or have people always felt this way? Like, even before social media. I mean, I definitely remember back in school, like,
Oh.
always comparing myself to classmates who just seemed to, I don't know, excel effortlessly.
Oh, for sure. It's definitely not unique to the digital age, right?
Yeah.
Comparing ourselves to others. That's like wired into us as humans.
Right.
But there's no question that social media has turned the volume way up on it. Creates this constant pressure to measure up to these, honestly, often unrealistic standards.
Yeah.
And the source, the podcast, makes this really interesting point that all this comparing can have some pretty serious effects on us internally.
Oh, absolutely. They talk about how it can feed self-doubt, that nagging feeling that we're not really capable or worthy.
Yeah, yeah.
And they also talk about how it can lead to perfectionism.
Ugh, yes. That drive to be flawless, which ironically can keep us from taking risks or actually going after what we want.
Exactly. It's almost like we're stuck in this cycle of trying to prove ourselves, but never really feeling good enough no matter what we do.
It's exhausting.
Totally. And then on top of all that, there's this whole other layer.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that so many people try to hide these struggles.
It's true.
Like they put on this facade of being fine,
Yeah.
even when they're battling these feelings deep down.
Yeah. The podcast actually brings in an expert from the British Association for Counseling and Psychotherapy to talk about this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they said, and I'm quoting here, many people mask their struggles with the facade of being fine, which makes it even harder to address the root cause of these feelings.
Wow. That's really powerful.
It is. And it's a good reminder that we can't always judge by appearances.
Right.
We've got to pay attention to those internal feelings and also to behaviors that might be like a clue that someone's wrestling with this sense of not being enough.
That's so true. And the podcast actually does a good job of laying out some of those external signs,
Okay, like what?
like avoiding challenges,
Oh, yeah.
because they're so afraid to fail, or constantly needing approval from other people.
Right, right. Or downplaying their accomplishments. Like they're trying to make themselves smaller so they don't stand out too much.
Exactly. Like we're all trying to shrink ourselves to fit into some mold of what we think good enough should look like.
Instead of celebrating what makes us unique and all our individual strengths.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
And that brings us to what I thought was the biggest takeaway from this whole podcast. This idea of shifting away from defining our worth based on achievements
Yeah.
and instead like recognizing our inherent value as just human beings.
This was a huge aha moment for me, too, when I was listening to the podcast.
Really?
Yeah. One of the hosts was talking about how all of his achievements, all these external things he'd accomplished, they didn't actually make him feel worthy. And it really hit home for me because I've definitely been there, that whole, if I just achieve X, then I'll finally feel good enough.
Yeah, we all fall into that trap. But the reality is self-worth isn't a destination, like something you win. It's a foundation you build from within.
And what I loved is that they gave some really down-to-earth examples of what that inner shift can look like.
Oh, I'm curious. What were they?
So one of the hosts, he was saying that he finds genuine pride in his sense of humor, like his ability to make people laugh.
Oh, that's sweet.
And the other host, she finds this deep satisfaction in being a good listener.
Ah,
And these aren't about, accolades or status. It's about how they impact others with their own unique qualities.
It's a good reminder that our worth is often found in those little things, those small but meaningful parts of who we are. And it makes me wonder, like, what are those things for you? What are those things about you that make you feel genuinely proud beyond, awards or whatever, those qualities that make you you?
That is such a good question. It really makes you stop and think.
It does. Because recognizing those inherent strengths, that's the first step toward cultivating real self-worth, the kind that can't be shaken.
So recognizing our inherent worth, that's a great starting point. But how do we actually, cultivate it? Like make it grow?
The podcast actually gave some really practical tips that I thought were helpful. One that stuck with me was this idea of celebrating the small achievements.
Oh,
I
interesting.
have a tendency to just focus on these like big, huge goals.
Yeah,
And sometimes they seem so far off. It's like, ugh, so discouraging.
totally. We get so fixated on those big milestones that we miss those smaller wins along the way.
Exactly.
And those little wins, even something as simple as, organizing your closet, can actually have a big impact on how we feel about ourselves. Like, hey, I can do things.
Yes, that's exactly it. I was so proud of myself when I finally reorganized my closet.
Good for you.
It wasn't going to change the world or anything, but it felt so good to finally tackle it.
I bet. It's that sense of accomplishment, no matter how small the task,
Yeah,
that can really keep us motivated.
totally. It builds those positive habits and helps us, build momentum toward those bigger goals. It's like proving to ourselves, hey, I can do this.
It's amazing how those little things can have such a big ripple effect on our overall sense of self.
Yeah.
The podcast also had this other great point about like reframing failures
Oh, interesting.
as learning opportunities.
Yeah.
Instead of beating ourselves up when we make mistakes, maybe we should see them as valuable lessons.
I love that. Growth in our personal lives, careers, anywhere, it always involves setbacks. It's inevitable.
Right.
It's not about avoiding them. It's about like how we choose to see them and what we learn from them.
Yeah. Do we let those setbacks define us, or are they fuel to keep going?
Exactly.
And that's where self-compassion comes in, right?
Oh, 100%.
Being kind to ourselves, especially when we, mess up. It's so easy to spiral into negative self-talk.
It is. Self-compassion is so important. Think about it. How would you talk to a friend who is going through a hard time? You wouldn't bash them for their mistakes. You'd offer support, encouragement. We need to treat ourselves with that same kindness and understanding.
Yeah. Be our own best friend.
Totally. Cheering ourselves on even when we make mistakes.
Because, let's be real, sometimes that inner critic can be brutal.
Oh, it can be so harsh. And that's actually where things like mindfulness and gratitude can be so helpful.
Oh, yeah.
Taking time to notice the good things, even when things are hard, can really help us shift our perspective and have a more, positive conversation with ourselves.
I love that. Like,
Yeah.
focusing on what we're grateful for, finding those little moments of joy, it can help drown out that negative self-talk. The podcast ends by asking the listener 2 questions,
Okay.
and I think they perfectly capture everything we've been talking about.
What are?
The first one is, when was the last time you felt genuinely proud of yourself?
Ooh, good one.
And they're specific about it too, not for something you achieved, but maybe for a moment of kindness or courage or just showing up for yourself or someone else.
That is such a good question. Really makes you think about what truly matters,
It
right?
does. And then the next question is, how can you be kinder to yourself today? It's like, okay, we've talked about all this stuff.
Right.
Now, what's one tiny thing you can actually do right now to nurture yourself, to build that self-worth?
Maybe it's taking a break when you feel overwhelmed. Or expressing gratitude for something, anything, no matter how small. Or acknowledging the effort you're putting in, even if the results aren't what you hoped for.
Those are such good suggestions. It's all about remembering that we're all works in progress. And this whole self-worth journey, it's a process. There are going to be ups and downs.
For sure.
But what matters is that we keep showing up for ourselves
Yeah,
with compassion and, a commitment to keep growing.
I love that. And you know what? It's important to remember you are not alone in this.
Yeah.
Everyone struggles with this.
Everyone feeling not good enough. It's a human thing. We all go through it. And, that's a really good point. Like, we're all in this together. We all have those moments where we feel, I don't know, less than. But we don't have to go through it alone.
Sometimes just admitting it, just acknowledging those feelings, that can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
It's like we take away their power when we bring them out into the open.
Exactly.
Right.
And I got to say, one of the most powerful things about this whole podcast was how they ended it,
Oh, how'd they end it?
with this super simple but really profound statement: you deserve to be valued.
Ah, I love that. Gets right to the heart of it, doesn't it? I mean, that's what we all want, right?
It
To
is.
feel seen, appreciated, valued for who we are, like really are.
And the thing is, you do deserve to be valued, every single person listening. You deserve to feel worthy, to feel loved. It's not something you have to earn. It's something you have it already.
It's true. It's not about what you achieve or how you look or what other people think. Your worth, it's just there. It's part of you.
And that is such a good thing to remember, especially on those days when, that inner critic is being extra loud.
Yeah, yeah. It's like a good mantra to have, you know? When you're doubting yourself, just remember, I deserve to be valued.
I love that. And hey, if any of this resonated with you, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Share your own experiences, maybe those times when you felt really proud of yourself, or any takeaways that stuck with you. Let's keep this conversation going in the comments.
Yeah, let's create a space where we can all, like, support each other.
Exactly. Because, sometimes just knowing you're not alone in this, it can make all the difference.
Absolutely.
So true. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave you with that one powerful statement again. You deserve to be valued. Let that be your reminder today, tomorrow, and every day. Thanks for joining us.